Hey friends, welcome to Introverts Unmuted. I am your host, Amber Hansel, and we talk about all things building up your confidence as introverts, lead generation and engagement in this online space that feels authentic to you. Today, I'm really excited. I have my guest, Ambar, on. First of all, I love that our names are like one letter off from each other. So super awesome. And I'm so happy to have you on today. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. So, Amber has an amazing podcast called The Lighthouse Within. So, tell me more about your podcast and what really brought it on.
Yeah, definitely. So I like to say my podcast is all about resilience for life changes. And I really define that as the ability to go through hard situations and bend and adapt through them, but not break and fall under pressure. I think we will all face storms in our life that we can't avoid, those things that you just can't control. And the idea of the lighthouse within is being able to cultivate your own inner light, your own inner strength, your own inner power to really move through those seasons of life. And it was inspired a lot by my own life, to be honest. I've gone through a lot of difficult seasons, battling with things like depression, social anxiety, which is extra tricky when you're an introvert, right? Like when I healed
Mhm.
from social anxiety, I was like, oh, wait, part of that might have just been me forcing myself to be an extrovert. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think so much I love your message behind what you do because we have so much that we go through. And that social anxiety is like, oh, wait a second. I don't actually. That's just me doing things that I am not meant to do.
yes,
So,
yes.
understanding so much about ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I talk about this in the first episode where like what are the key traits that define a person who is resilient? And one of the traits is confidence. And I define that not as, just liking what you see in the mirror, but feeling that you're capable of doing something. And then another aspect is having a strong sense of self. So really valuing your innate gifts, your innate talents, your innate traits that make you special and make you you and what you've come to bring to this world. And, that's really what it, when I think about like introverts, I think so many times we're told that the things that make us special are wrong. And so I feel that it's really important to resilience to really embrace who you are.
Absolutely. I agree because we, are so much told that we have to be a certain way, especially in the online space with social media. We see it all and the pretty pictures and the highlights, and we're like, oh, we have to do that. But really understanding and accepting who we are, our true selves, is when those qualities that people maybe have told us weren't very good or even worthy are really the strengths that we can come into.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, before I even showed up online, I think about being in my early 20s and I was told because I'm quiet, I'm soft-spoken, I'm calm, and I was
Mhm,
told that I wasn't capable of being a leader because
mhm.
people think of leaders and they think of people who are very loud, who are very forceful, who are very dominant. And I'm really the kind of person who I like to pull up a seat for everyone at my table. And so I think that really early on in my life, I felt like, oh, I can't be a leader. I can't be a leader. And that sowed a lot of seeds of self doubt. But when I stepped back, I noticed I was like, wait, I actually am a leader. I mean, I was, editor in chief of my high school newspaper. Even in university, I was starting clubs, I was starting volunteer projects across the nation. And one of the things that I noticed was like people would naturally draw to me as a leader, not because I was dominating the space, but because I was making room for everyone, because I was coming in with insights and with knowledge. And I was just, sort of guiding people with this knowledge without being forceful. And because of that, they would turn to me as a leader. So it's really interesting how it's like we as introverts lead so differently, but we could be led to think that that's wrong and that makes us incapable of being leaders.
Absolutely. And there's a previous podcast episode where I talk about introverts are such good leaders in this space because, like you said, we pull up chairs continually for everyone in our space and we listen with empathy and we actively will take action when we decide after we analyze things and view everyone else's opinions with an open mind. And I think that's such a good quality of leaders because then people are going to flock to us, which, then it resonates back to social media when we are able to show up as the leader that we know we are and keep pulling up chairs for our community. That's when we can say, yeah, I have built a community around me in the online space. Once we take that step back and go, oh, yeah, I did do that. I am doing it.
Yeah, I love that. And I think even just with my own journey right now, so I used to have a travel blog on Instagram and I relaunched for my podcast. So I stopped doing my travel blog about 3 years ago when COVID hit. Well, that was much longer, right?
Yeah,
Just it was a time warp time.
it is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but now I'm on there and I'm building my community as a podcaster. And I feel like, you get on there and you hear from so many Instagram gurus about how to go viral and about like how to get a ton of followers really, really fast. And I actually on Threads, one of my posts once went viral and I gained like hundreds of followers in a weekend. And it actually felt really empty. It felt
Yeah.
really empty.
Mhm.
Yeah, and part of that and what was interesting about that is, like, suddenly I had so many followers, but the people who were still really engaging with me were the people who I had built those one-on-one relationships with at an earlier stage of my following, who I was, like, constantly engaging with them, they were engaging with me. They're still my main, like, bread and butter, they're still my biggest supporters online. And it's not really the people that I gained when I went viral. And I think it's because of those one-on-one connections. They see me as someone who is genuine, as someone who really wants to engage, someone who supports them, someone who cares about them. Whereas like when I went viral, it was just like, they were just numbers. And I think in reverse as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I like that you had that experience of going viral and experiencing that and realizing, oh, that really didn't get me what I wanted. It didn't fulfill me. And I think you go back to wanting that genuine connection. And that's where the magic happens. I always say on social media, the magic happens in the DMs because that's where we build really good relationships that take us way farther beyond what we can imagine. I was talking to someone on Instagram and she's like, oh my gosh, I've never connected with someone in Canada and she's in South Africa. And realizing she's like, social media has made the world a small place. I said, yes, because of the ability to connect so authentically and genuinely without having to go viral.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I mean, even just the fact that, I'm in Lisbon, you're in Canada,
Yeah.
and we can connect on a similar topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's so special that once we realize we step back and say, I can have these strategies in place to connect with people all over the world that share a similar idea as me, that relate to me. Because I think we can feel very alone in, well, I'm an introvert and I'm going to sit in my corner and that's what I'm going to do. But we know that we have to get out there.
Yes, yeah. I also think like there's an intimidation factor, right? Like if you scroll through your Reels tab, even for just a second, it feels like everyone's screaming at you. Yeah. And when you're like on the quieter side or on the calmer side, like I feel I am, it feels kind of like, whoa, will people hear me when everyone else seems like they're just screaming? And I feel like even as a consumer of content myself, I do feel drawn to people who are giving off calm vibes because that's what I want. And I think like there's something to be said if there's any introverts out there who are listening and are also worried about like, am I loud enough to be heard in this space? It's like, I think people who want your energy will look for you and will stop and be like, oh, you know, for me, even like, I'm like, oh, this person isn't using controversy and like urgency to reel me in. I'm like, oh, I want to hear more from them. So I
Yeah.
think, yeah, there's a space for everyone, really.
And there really isn't. I don't think we need any more loudness in this space. We need to bring it back down.
Yeah.
And I don't think that we need to dance, lip sync, do all those things to attract the people. Doing a trend that doesn't fit who you are is going to attract the wrong people to your audience. Then you're not going to be able to connect with them in the DMs because they're not going to understand, why are you talking to me?
Yes, definitely.
So when we show up as that true leader and step back and go, hey, this is me, this is what I do, this is what I love, and this is what I like, then it opens up these doors that go, someone else, is scrolling and goes, oh, yes, I really relate to that too. And I think that's where the content really comes into play, is that it allows you to resonate with people when you're not so loud.
Yeah, definitely. I was just thinking about like in my 9 to 5 life, I'm a social media manager for a pretty big brand. We have about 6-figure following on there. And sometimes when our posts go viral, we end up getting dragged and like so much
Mhm.
negativity. And there's something to be said of like, I think when you're an introvert or, maybe if you are struggling with self-consciousness showing up online, it's like you think you want to go viral, but when you get there, it's like you actually don't want this kind of attention. It is nicer to grow that following slow and steady and build those connections with people who really resonate with your message and who need what you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think then it goes into, when someone does go viral, they go into such an overwhelmed status that takes a while to recover from, because they have all these comments, all these messages, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to maintain this when that's not what I had anticipated to happen? No one's prepared for it. And when you are able to build slowly and build those connections, you have more control over what happens. And, we don't necessarily always have control over what goes viral because it doesn't make sense. So, really coming back to, okay, this is what I can do, and this is what I have control over in these conversations, and who I want in my community to really grow and expand my brand.
Yeah, definitely. And I think when you go viral, you have way less control over who's following you. Yeah. And
Mhm.
and again, I think there's so much pressure because of all the Instagram gurus out there telling you this is how I got 10,000 followers in 2 minutes, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, if I'm not getting those numbers, is my content bad?" And I think, that's why I go back to, it's so important to have a strong sense of self and
Mhm.
to not let your value be rooted in the numbers. But I like to say my new favorite metric is DMs, actually. My new favorite metric is DMs. And when people go out of their way to say, like, oh, I loved your podcast episode. I loved it so much. I shared it with my boss. Or like, oh, one of your quotes from your podcast ended up on my wall. I'm going to look at it every day. And that matters so much more to me in the end than like 2,000 comments, or likes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know, I've previously done for you lead gen and engagement. And I really, when I was tracking things, and even in my own business now, as I'm tracking, I track my DM conversations, and I tell people it's much more important to track the conversations that you're having, because how else are you going to tell if someone's going to work with you or not?
Yeah.
You're going to get that 1% that's going to randomly click your link and do that thing. 1%. Like, and especially as introverts, we have to have that relationship before we buy or listen or do anything. So, understanding where your messages are, what type of conversations you're having can really change things up. And it's a big reality check of going, oh, maybe I'm not selling as much, or maybe I am being too upfront, or maybe I'm being too shy and held back. And that's not really who I am. So, analyzing all of those can really improve your self confidence too, and going, oh, wow, look at me go with all those messages.
Yeah, definitely. I invest way more in my threads and my stories than I even do in some of my feed posts, because I notice that it leads to more conversations, and it is probably the thing that leads most to people then going to my podcast and checking it out and subscribing. But my actual real posts, not as much as those more intimate spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. And when there are certain times of year too where posts are not going to do as well because are taking over, and we all go through, like, there's the ebbs and flows of it. But our conversations don't have to ebb and flow. And
Mhm.
Threads is such a great place because it is straight conversation. People aren't necessarily judging on that pretty picture. They're looking straight at your words and your content.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like Threads is for the girl, like Threads is for the introverts. It is my
Yes.
favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely quiet. I was like scrolling threads as one does, and like someone posts your reel, and I was like, you ruined my vibe. Like, get out of here.
Same way. I'm like, no, get out of here with that. Leave that on Instagram.
I know. I was like, no, that's not welcome here.
Yeah, you are allowed to post photos sparingly, but don't get
Yeah,
crazy either.
exactly. I'm like, just post like a static photo. That's okay.
Yeah.
I can be okay with that. But, and so I've also tried to take that, how I feel on threads, over to Instagram. Maybe I ignore the picture and only read the caption.
Mm.
I've tried to, so that then my comment feels like a threads comment. And it's kind of changing how I'm viewing Instagram, instead of, because it has come and changed so much of pretty pictures and all the feed posts and the reels, and now it's going back to carousels and all of that. But there's always been captions. There's always been the words. And so I think sometimes we have to remember, we can just go back to the words and be introverts and look at the words and have that communication.
Yeah, I love that so much, because I feel like people don't leave good comments anymore. And I
Mhm.
think, like, when we talk about authenticity and the ways that introverts naturally shine in the online space, it's like we're so thoughtful, we're so
Mhm.
reflective. And so we have the capacity to stand out by leaving those meaningful
Yeah.
comments where we actually want to connect with the person. I think I'm gonna try that.
Yeah, it's definitely changing, because then what I've actually noticed is the comments that are being left on mine are a lot more thoughtful and a lot more genuine. And then I can start a conversation in the DMs off of that comment. And that's what it's supposed to be for. And I think we've forgotten along the way with the emojis and I just totally forgot the word of, like, where it does the text for you. Um,
Mm.
we've just used all of these things instead of sitting back and actually reading the things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with the way I see social media moving, especially with the rise of AI, like it's so easy to generate a lot of content now. Well, I'm gonna say that with a grain of salt. It's easier to to generate a lot of content these
Mhm,
days, but a lot of it all sounds the same.
mhm.
And I think really having those, like, meaningful captions, meaningful stories, your own authenticity is really going to help you shine in this next era of social media.
Yes, absolutely. I think introverts are really going to be coming into their own, realizing that we don't have to be held back from all of the loudness. We can kind of create our own space and create our own tables where we are bringing the chairs and we are at the head of the table. And it's a really long table because we're all at the head. And so each of us are leaders in our own way. And it's really coming back to finding that unique strength that each of us has so that we can share it.
Yeah, I really love that. I guess I'm wondering, like, what are some ways that you have found your own unique strengths?
Yeah, I think it's been a journey, which I think all of us have experienced a journey. And I think in the last year, I have gone more to meditation and really diving into my own inner self and realizing that self-reflection has changed how I want to present, and which then has built up my confidence and being like, this is what I do. I help others find their confidence so that they can sell to others. I help them because I've done lead generation engagement. I can find people and I can talk to people and I can do all of that. But as introverts, we have different ways to do it. And I don't think there was enough talk about how to do it with low energy or with, sitting quietly with yourself first before you go out and be loud.
I love that so much. Actually, when I was starting my podcast journey, which has not been that long, as I just recently launched it, but I
Mhm.
remember I felt so overwhelmed. Like, I felt so overwhelmed online with all the content creation. I still have a 9 to 5, so I'm starting this as like a side hustle.
Mhm.
And I just remember having this thought put on my heart that, like, I'm trying to be somebody else, and that the
Mhm.
fastest way to not make it to where I'm meant to go is to become somebody else, because I can only arrive at that destination as myself because it's meant for me. And I felt like I was so pressured to, like, oh, I have to post on social media more, I have to do this and that, or I have to be consistent. And actually, when I gave myself permission to just, like, you know what, I'm just going to show up when I want to show up and I have something meaningful to say, and I'm not going to post just to post. And I
Yes.
just let it go. And you know what? The world kept spinning. Everything did not fall apart. I'm still growing an audience to my podcast. People are loving it. People are leaving ratings.
Mhm.
So it's like, yeah, I totally agree with you. You know, give yourself permission to do things differently and really do things differently in a way that lets your best quality shine.
Yeah, and I love that you just realized I'm just going to do whatever I want. And I think so many of us, aren't giving ourselves permission to do that, to just be like, well, I could just do that because this online space is the wild, wild west. We can do whatever we want. There's not necessarily people telling us what to do. There is, but we don't have to listen to them. So I think that's so important that we can just show up. And I think I decided to do that when I started this podcast too. I was like, you know what? I'm just going to do this and see what happens. I'm going to have some fun and I'm going to get the message out there. And I think that's what everyone in their heart knows, that they have something to say. As introverts, we hold it really, really close, but we have to have a space to let it out. And so, you are creating a space for people to express, and I'm creating, we're all creating spaces for different people to express themselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's so important to hold on to that why, because
Mhm.
I think you can get so lost in the sauce of, like, the metrics and feeling that need for external validation from the
Mhm.
metrics. But really just holding on to your why and that space that you want to create is important.
Absolutely. I like love how you just said lost in the sauce. That is like the best thing I have heard. I'm writing it down. Because it's so true. It becomes this overwhelming space. And that's why I always say go back to your own self. Go back to your inner confidence. Go back to you. Go back to that why. And that's what's going to bring the people.
Yeah, I love what you said earlier about spending time with yourself. And
Mhm.
I think it's so easy as introverts to not see that being online is also socializing and can also drain us. And last
Mhm.
week I actually oh, yeah, sorry, a car passed by. Last week I took a trip by myself. So I love to travel by myself sometimes, which is such an introverted thing to enjoy. And I had felt going up to that trip, I was so overstimulated. I was like so stressed. Also, because it was a holiday weekend in the United States. I still work for a US company. And so I had like extra work on my plate. And I was just so stressed going into it. But when I went on that trip by myself and got to spend time with my own energy, I was just like sitting quietly next to a waterfall with the trees, and it was so, like, relaxing and quiet and calm. And then I
Mhm.
was like, "Wait, I think the problem was I've been spending too much time on social media."
Mhm.
And it just really made me reflect on, like, I was kind of, like, running myself ragged thinking, like, if I don't show up online every day, then my podcast is gonna flop.
Yeah.
Um, and I think just like, again, giving myself that permission of like, if I don't embody my own energy, if I don't embody my greatest gifts, I'm never going to arrive where I'm meant to arrive. And really just giving myself that permission to be like, you know what? It is not authentic to me to spend this much time socializing. So I'm just not going to do it.
Yeah, and I think that is so beautiful in that you were able to just go by yourself and reflect. And it is a skill to do that. And it takes practice and patience. I am a mom of two boys that are very busy and loud. And so understanding that I have to step back, and social media is exactly that. It is socializing. And as introverts, we have to realize that our energy doesn't come from other people, it comes from ourselves. So if we don't energize ourselves, we burn out in the fastest way possible. So being able to take a trip by ourselves, experience the nature, because I loved how you were outside in nature. I love it when it's not snowing and cold. Even when it's snowing, it's still beautiful. But it's the appreciation of those small moments that really come down to it. And I know you speak about this in your podcast, is those moments, those sweet little moments are what really brings us back to us.
Yeah, yeah, and it's so important to stay rooted in who you are because it's such a long journey to have a successful business or successful podcast or be successful as a content creator. And so it's just so important to stay rooted in your identity and your gifts and who you are and not let anything around you drag you out of your natural essence.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it more beautifully. We have to be rooted in ourselves and discover what really lights us up as ourselves, different things that we can do to help us on that journey because that journey never ends. And I think that's the part that people are like, well, I'm here. But you're not because you are still living every single day, which means your self-reflection has to happen every single day. As much as some days we're like, I can't today, 5 minutes is all people need. We don't need to have a big to do about it all the time. I'm looking forward to the coming up. I have my husband and I are going away for a weekend without the kids, and he has a work meeting, and I'm like, ooh, a hotel by myself all
Yes,
day?
please.
Yes, please. It is something like that that is just like, yay! The introvert in me is very, very excited to hang out by myself all day in a hotel and get some work done by myself.
Yeah, that sounds honestly, it's like paradise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, Amber, this was such a good conversation about really finding and rooting ourselves so that we can grow. So, make sure that you guys go follow her podcast, The Lighthouse Within. I will have the link down below here on Substack. Make sure you guys leave a comment and start the conversation because we can do that, and like the podcast and share it with your friends. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you as well.